Welcome, welcome. Hate to interrupt the music. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for Gun Violence Reduction Strategies. This is the first in a three-part webinar series presented by our partners at the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform. And today we have special guests from the Forgotten Third in Houston. My name is Daniela Poe. I'm a senior associate at the Annie Casey Foundation's Juvenile Justice Strategy Group. I was just looking through the list of names of participants, and I can't decide if I'm more excited to see so many names I recognize or so many new ones. So let's celebrate both. As we hoped, I'm seeing youth justice practitioners from courts and probation all over the country, seeing grassroots community leaders. I'm seeing community service providers, law enforcement, elected officials. Welcome, welcome all. I'm going to limit my comments very, very briefly. We're going to reserve the last 15 minutes for questions. So please, as you hear from the presenters, use that Q&A box to type in a question. We will try to get to as many as possible in the last 15 minutes of this session. We will also be recording today's session, and we'll send a recording to everyone who's registered. And we'll be posting the recording on the Foundation's YouTube channel. And with that, please join me in welcoming our first presenters, David Muhammad and Keelan Henderson from National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Danielle. And I agree. It is exciting to see so many people with us today. Some familiar names and many others, and really look forward to this discussion and a little bit about us very briefly. The National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform. We are based in Oakland, California, but we work throughout the country on justice reform initiatives as well as violence reduction initiatives. And we're excited that today our normal work with the Annie E. Casey Foundation is more on the justice reform side, working with probation departments and community-based organizations to what we call reduce, improve, and reinvest, reduce the size of the system, improve the system and the outcomes of system-involved youth and young adults, and reinvest back into communities. But similar in our work to focus systems work and to improve outcomes, we also have worked a long time to reduce gun violence in communities across the country. Today, we're going to talk about prevention, and as our my colleague Keelan Henderson will talk about our work to really help categorize some of this, because a big part of what we do around the country is help policymakers, community organizations, practitioners have clarity of purpose, clarity of definition of what are we trying to achieve and by what time frames. And I know many of you on the webinar today work in juvenile justice agencies, work in juvenile probation departments, or work with these agencies. And historically, to be honest, that field has not really thought about violence reduction as a primary goal. I worked for a decade in that directly. I've worked for 2 decades or more in the field, but directly inside of systems. And just one quick story I'm going to tell before passing it on to my colleague. When I was in Alameda County, I was the chief probation officer where Oakland, California is, and we were in the midst of renewing a contract with our risk assessment provider. And right around this time, I had a staff member come to me, and it was on the adult side, but we used versions of the same risk assessment for both youth and adult. And he said, "Chief, I've got 2 people on my caseload. One is a 45-year-old who is homeless and drug addicted. And I also have another person on my caseload who's 24 years old, who is in a gang, who has gun charges. And both score the same on the risk assessment, and therefore they're on my heightened caseload." And I knew this was not right, and I posed this to the risk assessment developers, which was good timing, because just a few days later I had a meeting with them to think through if we wanted to renew the contract. And their response to me was, that's correct. The instrument worked well. They both have the same likelihood of recidivating. And I said, you know what? Thank you. You're right. And we're not going to renew this contract. One is likely to steal from the store. The other might be more likely to shoot someone. I want to know the difference in the severity of recidivism and where we should focus our limited resources. And so to that point of really understanding where we're trying to focus resources, what we're trying to prevent. And today we're going to focus more on prevention. And in the future, a webinar will focus on intervention. How do we reduce gun violence happening now? And so we are happy to spend this time with you. Look forward to discussion and also look forward to partners doing this work on the ground that you're going to also hear from. But for now, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Keelan Henderson, who is going to take us through this discussion and really kind of thoughts around focusing on violence prevention. Keelan?
Yes, thank you, David. And again, welcome to everyone. And it is nice to be with you all today. I am really excited to talk about prevention. As David mentioned, a lot of our work actually focuses on intervention. But also, like you said, I think despite that, we know the importance of ensuring that, your work focuses on the right area, but not just focusing on the right area, but also focusing on what it's going to take to achieve the goal in which you want to achieve. And so with that, if I can go to the first slide, I really want to talk about the difference in achieving some of these goals. And so as David mentioned, again, most of our work is around intervention, specifically violence intervention. And of course, in order to see reductions in violence, it typically takes about 1 to 3 years. If strategies and programs are implemented correctly, you can see reductions within about 1 year to 3 years or so. And then also transformation or community transformation, cleaning up, neighborhood blight and education reform and other types of investments for the community can also reduce violence, but it's going to take a lot longer, anywhere from 15 to 20 years. And then we always hear about sort of the efforts around reducing violence through prevention, right? And so we know that prevention efforts, of course, focus on the sort of underlying factors that lead to individuals being involved in violence. But that said, even prevention efforts would take roughly around 5 to 10 years. So as we think about prevention, we also have to be real about just how long it can take to actually achieve that goal. But then the question is, how do you do that? Next slide, please. And so we often hear prevention, and the truth of the matter is you can prevent a lot of different things. Certainly you can want to try to prevent recidivism and truancy and crime rates among youth. But as mentioned before today, we're going to talk about what it takes to prevent violence in particular among young populations. Next slide. And so first you have to find, what is violence prevention, right? Like, how do we define violence prevention? And as mentioned, it really is focusing on the underlying causes and risk factors that lead to violence. We know there are a lot of different causes that can lead to that. But today we're going to also talk about some of the risk factors that we see with individuals who are under the age of sort of 24, 25, or that transitional age, youth as we call them, who are involved in violence. And as mentioned before, it can take anywhere from 5 to 10 to 15 years or so. Next slide. So again, to prevent violence, you want to focus on the young people. So you want to focus on the right population, but you also want to focus on the ones that have the risk factors that go along with individuals committing violence in that age group. Next slide, please. And here are some of those risk factors, right? Here are some of those. And a lot of these, with you all being practitioners, I'm sure are familiar with, dealing with juvenile populations that struggle with substance use and school absenteeism. Many of them have other risk factors, including homelessness and ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences. Of course, we know that those are traumatic events, right, that occur in childhood, that typically causes stress, and that stress leads to changes in a lot of different things, including like brain development and effects on how the body responds to the stress. And then we know that ACEs can also be linked to many health problems, including mental illness and substance use. But the idea is that these are the risk factors that we see in individuals that are involved in violence within their sort of age range, or that youth, young adult population, that can lead to individuals eventually becoming what we call high risk adults, or those who are high risk for being a victim or perpetrator of gun violence. Next slide, please. And so here's an example of that. As we think about risk factors, here is an example of someone 13 years old, someone who is not quite an adult yet, but here is experiencing these risk factors. I'll throw out a few of them. Has an IEP, has been suspended for school, has recently been arrested for auto theft. And so these are risk factors that will sort of trigger us to say that this individual needs to receive services and programming in order to reduce those risk factors and reduce the likelihood of this individual being involved in gun violence. Next slide. And so I wanted to also, though, talk about some of the examples of organizations and programs that are working to reduce, again, these risk factors, right? And so the first one, MST, or multi-systemic therapy. Many of you, or some of you, are familiar with that, which is really just a strategy that includes family and peers and loved ones, or the community, but it includes and involves everyone and puts everyone into the process of therapy for a child who is typically struggling with substance use, so that the child has a team of support and can foster the child's success and recovery. Other programs like Becoming a Man, a program designed by an organization called Youth Guidance, that actually works to improve the social and emotional and behavioral competencies of youth, typically in the 7th to 12th sort of grade range. But they do that through cognitive behavioral therapy and mentoring. And then also the Forgotten Third, as David mentioned as well, which is an organization also working to reduce some of these risk factors, and happens to be our next presenter. So with that, I know that was a quick sort of rundown of, again, what are we trying to prevent here. Of course, we know that we're trying to prevent violence in particular, gun violence in particular. And how do we do that? We look at the risk factors associated with youth that are involved in violence and can potentially one day be involved in gun violence as an adult. And then some of the programs that we know that are working across the country, again, to reduce those risk factors. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Carlton Harris, who is the founder and executive director of the Forgotten Third.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much, Keelan, for the introduction. I'm sitting here with one of our young adult interns, Mr. Noe Zuninga. And we'll start our presentation by our credible messenger coordinator, Mr. Taylor Maxey, who will go through the 5 stages of prevention.
Hey, thanks a lot, Carlton, and everyone else, NICJR and EKC. Thanks for having us be a part of this webinar. And just to give you a little background on myself, I came up in a community-based organization as a 16-year-old participant in a poetry writing workshop while I was detained in a juvenile detention facility. And I would later go on to work for that organization, and later I would go on to be on the board of directors from the organization. So needless to say, I've had the privilege of experiencing and witnessing a lot of different angles of preventative measures from colleagues, mentors, and things of my own. And so I just want to give a brief rundown of like of 5 stages of prevention and like kind of what it looks like. So for our first stage of prevention, we have engagement. And since we're talking about at-risk youth or high-risk youth, whatever term you prefer, to establish meaningful connections with this particular population, you must be willing to meet them where they are. And I don't just mean that in the literal sense of the word. That means meeting them where they are physically, uh, spiritually, emotionally. As we know, there is a lot of traumatic baggage that tends to come along with that population. So when attempting to establish meaning connections with this dynamic there, you definitely better be ready to roll your sleeves up. Next slide. And so now we have the invitation. So after you've started the engagement and kind of presented, you know, what it is that you have to offer or what you want to offer, the invitation here is the welcoming of further dialogue, further interaction, further community building, network opportunities, or what have you. Because if what you bring to the table resonates on some level with people, they're going to want to know, where can we find you? You know, what are you guys doing? How often are you doing it? What is it going to take for us to be a part of it? So you definitely, this is where you open up your arms and invite everything into your space. Oh man, excuse me. Next slide. Next slide, please. Oh, okay, here we go. So, and now stage 3, we have the ask. You know, what do you want from those who actually show up to, you know, your next gathering, your workshop, your organization? You know, what is it going to take? What type of participation is it going to take from them to actually make happen what it is you're trying to make happen? I mean, do we want to, you know, we definitely want to create a container that's safe enough to invite different perspectives into the mix. We want to keep it non-judgmental because when we're dealing with the high-risk youth population, there are a lot of, there's just a lot of so many different traumatic stories about, you know, violence, molestation, drug use, drug addiction, and a lot of these stories can definitely trigger some emotion, whether it be negative or positive. So you have to be able to sit in the discomfort of those things while creating, you know, holding the space, you know, what we like to say, while holding the space to allow these different things to come in. So, and you also want to prep your participants with these same parameters. Next slide. Next slide. Hello.
Yeah.
The witness stage. So basically, and this is just make sure you pay attention to everything that's unfolding in the workshop. You know, sometimes, or the workshop, the gathering, the event, you know, whatever, you know, term you prefer when it comes to this particular, any particular engagement with the target population. So pay attention to what is unfolding because you don't want to miss the key moment. Sometimes we go into these situations and we have a plan of what we want to do, so I'm flexible enough to allow it. This could be anything. This could be someone's first time opening up to, you know, share their story. You know, this could be a situation where, you know, somebody may want to come out, you know. And over the course of the years that I've been in this work, I've definitely seen a lot of these situations. So, so you definitely want to witness and make sure, you know, that you are that you know that you're present and focused enough to be able to make room for these other things, and then finding a way, if time permits, to tie or guide the workshop or the gathering back to what your initial intention was. Next slide. Oh, and just one other thing, and also don't try to have an answer for everything. Not having an answer for things is okay. You know what I mean? That just lets you guys know, you know what, we're here to try to figure it all out together. You know what I'm saying? You want to be as authentic as possible in your relationships and interaction with the young people. So don't, it's okay if you don't have the answer. And now for the fifth stage, when we close out the space, when we end the event, end the gathering, let's be intentional about shutting things down. And what I mean when I say this is we want to kind of recap everything that just took place. We want to also honor those who may have shared some really deep personal situations that they wouldn't normally bring to light in regular group settings, regular group or social settings. So we definitely want to honor those things and reflect on those things. And as we're getting to transition out of the gathering, make sure you let them know, because this is all about community building. So we want to keep the invitation alive, keep them informed about what's going on next, when is it happening, if there's if you guys can help transport, get the people there, let them know. So any type of logistical information that you want to, that you want to put out there about the next gathering, the next happening, this is the time to do it. And there's no universal blueprint to doing this work. There's no universal approach. It's just, these are some of the most effective things that I have witnessed I'm 44 now. So when I first came through the nonprofit at 16 years old, and as I'm still a part of the community now, this is almost nearly 30 years worth of engagement of different experiences and from different mentors, colleagues, and associates that I've met along the way. So, thanks for hearing me. And then at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Carlton to take us home.
Okay, next slide, we'll go to a video to kind of show the overview of our program and some of the work that we do. You can hit play for that.
And Lord, you say, Lord, you had that for us, Lord.
Make sure anybody trying to foul cars, nothing like that. Respect the man. Respect. That's the main thing, all right? All right. Okay, respect the young adults.
Young adults, they're called gies in our program. They're young adults.
I didn't value it. Now that I work hard for my money, I want
Next slide. So for us, the forgotten third, we take a public health approach to violence prevention. And when you're looking at a public health approach, is recognizing that crime and violence has to be identified as an issue that we have to together collectively come together to work on. So when you look at prevention, intervention, enforcement, and reentry, we use what's called a peer model. So we focus on primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention efforts. And so even when you're looking at the public health model, it talks about looking at defining the problem first. And so defining the problem for individuals may be different. Someone's problem for one young adult may be a different problem for another. But what is the root cause of violence in of itself? How did they get involved in the violence? So we also focus on cognitive behavior treatment when we're looking at the intervention, because a lot of the problems that our young adults encounter are beneath the surface. It's the thoughts, it's the feelings, it's the beliefs, it's the emotions, it's the traumatic experiences that no one has taken the time to address to help our young adults make that transition from being a youth to becoming a young adult. And so with that being said, can you go to the next slide for me? You always want to take an evidence-based practice, right? So what is the vision of your organization? What is the vision of the work? So for us, it is to reduce crime and violence and provide a second chance. One of the approaches that we use is the credible messenger approach. The name of our organization, the Forgotten Third, is based off the premise that national statistics says 2 out of 3 individuals that are released from prison will recidivate and are rearrested, and 50% of them will have a new offense. What we don't hear about is the 1 out of 3 that becomes successful. You hear about the 2/3 recidivating, going back into the system, but the 1 out of 3 that becomes successful are often forgotten about. So that's why we're called the Forgotten Third, because we focus on credible messenger mentoring and giving individuals like myself, an individual from the south side of Chicago, former gang member, drug dealer who did 6 years in prison. At the age of 19, I was sentenced to 18 years in prison, made that 180-degree turn, but that turn didn't happen overnight. The first time I went to prison, I didn't have a desire to change. The second time I went, I said, Carlton, I need to do something different about my life. And I became associated with a group of individuals that was focused on changing their mindset and putting action into place to prepare themselves for successful reentry back into the community. And so when you're looking at cognitive behavior treatment as an approach, you have to look at the things that our young adults are not getting maybe in a safe environment. So we called our place here the center. Is where love happens. We love on our young adults. We give them an opportunity here. Well, we focus on relationships, number one. We focus on education. We focus on skill building. We focus on employment, entrepreneurship, and then we focus on training. And so all of our framework is designed around the risk factors that we know prevent our young adults from becoming successful. So how do we get around those risk factors? How do we get the protective factors in place? The mentoring, the job readiness training, the cognitive behavior treatment, the boxing. Boxing is real good for us because it allows for them to release anger. It's an anger management tool. When I was in Chicago, I partnered with the organization and we had a motto that is better to sweat in the gym than bleed in the streets. So we'll get young adults off of the streets, take them into the boxing gym, teach them discipline, teach them self-control, teach them conflict resolution, where everything doesn't have to result in you picking up a gun or getting into a fist fight in order to resolve what type of conflicts you have. And so using a social ecological model, we're looking at the individual level. On the individual level, I have a young adult next to me who will be talking in a minute. Noe, what does Noe need on the individual level, right? What are the risk factors that prevent him from becoming successful? And then go on to relationships. What type of relationships are our young adults are involved in that we have to help them exit out of those relationships? But one thing I learned a long time ago is that before you can exit or enter into a new relationship, you have to exit the old. Our young adults need a sense of accountability. They need a sense of responsibility. They need a sense of belonging. If they don't have a sense of belonging, they're going to gravitate back towards the gangs. They're going to gravitate back towards the guns and back towards the violence, because what we teach them through cognitive behavior treatment is that what you put before your eyes and before your ears enter into your mind, create a thought, and then it manifests in your behavior. So we focus more on, let me change your thinking. Let me dig down on the inside of you and show you that you have these skills, you have these talents, you have these gifts, and that you are not what someone else has identified you as. We have a motto where we say, just because you fail, F-E-L-L, doesn't mean you failed, F-A-I-L-E-D. And so through this process, we really use the evidence-based practices and our own experiences to help our young adults, transition from incarceration back into community, from being violent to becoming nonviolent. Next slide, please. And again, one of the key things when you're working with these young adults is you have to have family engagement. And sometimes the family can be a part of the problem, right? And I think we all understand that. So family engagement is very important, and reaching the family and meeting them where they are. So as we go through family engagement, working with the moms, and oftentimes what I see a lot, and I'm not sure if everyone else experienced this, we have more single moms involved in the lives of the young adults than we do dads. So I think right now we're working with over 30 families. And out of those families, we probably have 5 or 6 dads that are involved. And so engaging them and being a support system for them and letting them know that we are an extension of your family, because we build a family in a safe environment here at our center. The next thing is educational support. We're big on looking at the school to prison pipeline. What are those indicators, and creating an early warning system on the education campuses that, alert the school system to say, hey, listen, this young adult is needing some intervention right now. So we need some primary prevention. It's good to give our young adults resources once they entered into the criminal justice system, but it's cheaper to do it on the front end. One of the quotes we have on our wall in the center is that an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure. It takes us less efforts to prevent this on the front end to remedy it on the back end. Education support is big for that. A lot of our young adults, Noya talk now, he's transitioning from GED and he wants to go to barber school. So what post-secondary education opportunities are out there where they can make a livable wage, right? And then the youth opportunities. What opportunities are we providing them? Youth and young adults, right? That prevent violence, because if we're not giving them any opportunities, they're going to go find something to do. We know that crime is synonymous with being, economically unstable, especially in these underserved communities. I often don't call our youth at risk. I call them underserved, because if we serve them properly and we level the playing field and we realize that this is not hard work, H-A-R-D, but this is hard work, H-E-A-R-T, we have to do it from the heart, and we have to show them love. And so with that, I'm going to leave the last 5 minutes that I have for Mr. Noy, who can share his experience of working with the Forgotten Third. I met this young man for a year ago in a detention facility that we're working with here in Harris County. He's been out now over a year. He's been working with us for, the last 4 months or so. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Noy Zuninga so you can hear directly from him. Noy.
First thing first, I want to thank everybody for giving me the opportunity to speak. And Mr. Harris, thank you so much for everything you've done. Really a blessing in my life. Well, honestly, this is a blessing to have once again. When I got out October 28th last year. And even though I was there, I was actually incarcerated for a year and 2 months. You would think that that your brain would automatically click. Like, you've been there so long, you just want to change. But honestly, it doesn't. It doesn't. It just breaks you. It just breaks you, honestly, because it was crazy for me to I didn't even expect to get out when I got out. I was facing 20 years, and thank God my 8th month was when I actually realized, I'm like, look, just leave it up to God, And I just kept praying and praying and praying. And out of nowhere, God listened. He heard all of my claims, and he actually gave me, it was supposed to be a 9 to 12 program, But since I was going to age out, it was a 3 to 6 program. That's whenever I met Mr. Carlton. And once again, it's a blessing because I got out. Like I said earlier, you would expect for you to be on check as soon as you get out. But no, I was actually struggling I was struggling a lot because I was new to society. Society was basically new to me. I was like, wait, how do I do this again? I don't remember the certain things, And I believe it was, see, I was out, I think 6 months, and Mr. Harris started a program, I believe. It was basically a work-based learning program, which automatically I already knew. I know Mr. Harris. I know he's a very good person. So I went to try it out. And I've been here at the office. I'm about to make the month. But honestly, it was very hard. It was very hard to keep a job because once again, society, you hear people talking mess about other people's at jobs, and people are very cruel. I'm not trying to be judgmental, but there is people out there that are evil. So I had a job, I was getting jobs, but I kept leaving it because certain stuff just kept on bothering me. And I realized it was all of the time that I was in there that was bothering me that I didn't know exactly what to do. I was basically confused. I was new to society, once again. So I gave it a try. And ever since, honestly, it's been a blessing. I don't have transportation and this is our business, but Mr. Carlton actually is helping me. He's Ubering me to work. And mind you, I live 40 minutes away. He takes the time to Uber me here and Uber me back just so he could help me. And honestly, I've gained a lot of knowledge. My mental state is on point because of Mr. Harris. When I came here, I was a bit emotional, but he's making me stronger, not just as becoming as a young man or a young adult, but just in general. But once again, I just want to thank everybody for listening to me and for giving me the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Correct. Thank you. And I guess we can open it up for questions now, I guess, Danielle or Keelan.
That's right. So we have some questions in the chat already, but I just want to thank our panelists, everyone. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and insight and your courage with us today. This is wonderful to have all of you. So let's start with the first question. David, I think this might be a good one for you.
Yes.
Tell us about risk assessment and violence.
Yes, this could be a whole other webinar. So a couple of things. I think one, this is a great question. This is what I've struggled with for a long time. I have a lot of both experience and opinions about this, but I'll try to be brief. The justice system, part of the point I was making at the top is the justice system's around trying to stop recidivism. In fact, often that's the only thing justice systems are judged on, which is not the sole outcome that we should be thinking about, particularly around young people, right? The absence of negative, right? We really should be looking at what great outcomes have occurred. Hear from this young man, right? But that being said, as it relates to violence, we have not found a very good risk assessment instrument, a standard instrument that you can pull off the shelf or contract with one of the many risk assessment developers. And some of those risk assessments I think are good and are actually accurate in doing what risk assessments do. They will put you in a grouping of people that come close to accurately predicting the outcomes of that group, right? There's few risk assessments that actually look at you really as an individual and try to predict you as an individual. They put you in a group to say, of all of the people in the low group, they will not recidivate past 20% or so. Everybody in the high group, when we look at them collectively, 80% of them will recidivate. Something along those lines, not precise, but that is how right, the risk instruments work. As it relates specifically to being accurate to predict violence, what we've experienced is a process that is a lot more predictive. And so we have conducted these analyses called the gun violence problem analysis in numerous cities around the country. I think we'll share with people maybe the DC, the Washington DC version, where it's a deep dive analysis of data, which of course risk assessments do, but it's also several qualitative interviews to really get an understanding of the risk factors that are present in the majority of people who become involved in gun violence, both victim and suspect. But it really is a dynamic process that is more predictive, meaning what recent incidents occurred, what are the risk factors of the people who are involved in recent incidents, and that allows us to be able to say, okay, this young person is at high risk of being involved in gun violence. And most of that means some retaliatory cycle of gun violence. And so when somebody you are connected with as a young person is involved in a shooting, either as victim or suspect, if you're connected with them and you also have a series of risk factors, that dynamic recent incident heightens you as somebody that's more likely to be involved in gun violence. I know it's a lot I'm going over here. And so the last thing I'll just say on this is we're really trying to pin this down in the state of Maryland. So NICJR has done a really deep dive in an assessment of all youth involved in gun violence in the state of Maryland. And obviously a large portion of that is in the city of Baltimore. So we've looked at every single young person, period, who's either been a victim or a suspect. We've also looked at every young person under the juvenile justice system who's been a victim or suspect. And we've done a data assessment on them. And then we've gone further of every young person, either a victim or suspect in a shooting this year. We've done a deep dive in terms of their background and a ton of information. We get a deep summary of every one of those young people. And we've been able to really see that there is not a lot of correlation between their detention risk assessment or their post or their more traditional supervision risk assessment and the likelihood of violence. And so it's a long way of saying, don't have an answer for you, but that the assessments themselves aren't wonderful in predicting violence. There are processes that I've experienced that are very good at doing that.
Thanks, David. I'm going to skip down to the last question posted. And Keeland, I think this one's for you. Can you share about the Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise program? We read about this program on the NICJR site, and it sounds amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's an amazing program. But I would say that it is a program that includes some cognitive behavioral therapy components in it as well. But it's a program that we oftentimes are asked to train folks in, whether they are part of an organization or a community-based organization, or we even had recently some requests from law enforcement agencies, but it is to train folks on how to engage with an individual around those three main topics, right? Healthy, what it means to be healthy, both physically and mentally and emotionally, as well as being wise or using wisdom or better decision-making to, of course, lead to better outcomes, and what it means to be wealthy. I think as we think about sort of these younger generations, there is an importance to make money and to make it quick. But what does that mean, and how do you make money and hold on to it? And so that curriculum really does hit all three. And it includes even some workshops that include sort of budgeting. It includes games to help folks learn how to budget the right way and to save, and some other pieces I'll throw out there include the difference between being a regular employee versus being a business owner, which you'll hear a lot of folks say and nowadays that they want to invest. They want to invest in Bitcoin, but what does it mean to be an investor? So we go into all of that. But more importantly, I would say that it uses individuals who are considered to be credible messengers or mentors or folks who can engage with these high-risk populations at the same time while they're being educated and talking about these three main areas. It is also supporting the work that happens on the ground. And so organizations are able to use this CBT curriculum as a tool to engage with folks even more that will ultimately produce better outcomes.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for all the love showing up in the Q&A. I hope everyone's seeing that. Carlton, I want to go to you with the question from Anonymous at 341. Do you accept youth into your program who do not yet have internal motivation to change? And if so, what strategies do you use to help young adults develop their why to change violent and/or criminal thinking and behavior?
Yes, we do. So the old saying, you can lead a horse to the water, but you can't make him drink. There's a small disclaimer that people never say, which is unless you put salt in his food. Salt makes you thirsty. And so for us, we'll get individuals that don't have a desire to change or really don't know what they want, right? And so what we'll do is expose them to different opportunities, and let them do what's called a SWOT analysis on themselves. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What are the opportunities you want to take? And then realizing that you yourself and only yourself are your biggest and only threat, right? So strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, letting them see that whatever they envision their life to be, that they can become that despite of all of the challenges. And then like myself and Taylor using our story, and Ernesto, he's another staff member here in the office. We're using our story to let them know that these are the challenges that we face. These are the mistakes and the bad choices that we've made. And these were our consequences. And our heart's desire is to prevent you from entering into the adult system, or recidivating back into the juvenile system. And so by giving them an opportunity to be themselves, the key thing that we do here is, I believe in the law of reciprocity. So let me give the young adult what they want first. And so when we work on a case plan with them, we have three different sections. There's EEE, education, employment, and extracurricular activity. So what's the extracurricular activity? What is the passion? What is the dream that the young adult have? And we start with that and we prioritize that over, what we believe that they need, so that they can have some buy-in to know that they don't deserve a seat at the table. They are the table. And so our youth voice is very important. And sometimes it's challenging because they didn't get into the situation that they're in overnight. So they're not going to get out of it overnight. So we have to uproot weeds and plant seeds simultaneously. So we're pulling up old ways of thinking. We're trying to do a hard reset. We have a program called Reset. And so we have to do a Control-Alt-Delete. Let's start over. Let's refresh. Let's refrag. Let's get you to the place that we know that you want to go, because we understand that violent and criminal behavior, it was a learned behavior. It was something that they saw before their eyes, went through their ears, entered into their minds, and manifested in their behavior. So if I can give them something different before their eyes, something different before their ears, it's going to create a new thought and then manifest in a new behavior. So short answer, yes, it's more challenging if they don't have a desire to change, but we'll sprinkle some salt on their food, make them a little thirsty, and we'll see what the end result will be.
Thank you. One of the many things I love about you, Carlton, is the metaphors that you weave into everything. So starting with the horses and ending with defragging. And so I don't know anything about horses or defragging, and somehow it helps me understand what you're saying. I want to jump up to the second question now in the Q&A from Steve Plank. The 5-stage, and so this is going to be to David to start out and then Taylor to comment after. The 5 stages Taylor Maxey is presenting make a lot of sense and are very respectful of a slow, thorough, human-to-human process. Do the panelists think interrupting gun violence ultimately needs to boil down to one-to-one in-person process of conversation and relationship building? Or should these person-to-person efforts go hand in hand with community-wide or mass efforts? Not a loaded question at all.
Right. So a couple of things. I think we will get into a lot more of kind of the mechanics of violence interruption and intervention in the next webinar. The short version of that is, Keelan talked about Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise, which is a trauma-informed, culturally relevant cognitive behavior therapy program, where when you pair that with one-to-one, right? Because the kind of theory of change for people making better decisions of not getting involved in violence is relationship, and then mentality shift, and third, connection to needed services. But ultimately, it's relationship, right? If I always say, if young people did exactly what I told them to do, we'll be all right. Problem is, they're not. Who the hell are you? What the hell are you talking about? Right. But now, if I develop a relationship with a young person over time, and I'm consistent with them, and I build a trusting and positive relationship with them, and then over time, I'm still not going to preach or dictate to them, but as I engage them on advice and counsel and pointing out and asking open-ended questions, and many folks know, motivational interviewing, using some of those principles, that is a lot more likely that somebody will then make better decisions, largely based upon the relationship I have, right? So what we talk about is relationship first, use that relationship to gain influence, use that influence to help somebody make better decisions, and better decisions lead to better outcomes. And so in a certain sense, therefore the answer is yes, kind of one-to-one. But what we'll talk about a lot more in the next webinar is specificity and intensity. When we're talking about very specifically focusing on reducing shootings, like to just get really specific, then we have to specifically focus on individuals at high risk of shooting, which is a small number of people. And then we have to do that in an intensive way. Right. So most programs don't have the funding, the resources, the personnel to have a level of intensity that is strong enough for people at the most highest risk. Right. And so what we suggest in that instance is a life coach, a mentor who has 6, 7, 8 people. Right. And that's their full-time job, so that they can talk to every one of them every single day, see each of them 3 to 4 times a week in person, develop a life plan with them, and do that for 6, 12, 18 months at least, right? That level of intensity is rare in a program because they don't have the funding, the resources, right, the staffing to be able to do that. Again, that's a long preview of the next webinar.
Taylor, come on in.
Good. Oh, you know what? I got a little lost in that long preview. Can you repeat the part that I'm supposed to address? Sorry about that.
Of course, no. Someone was recognizing and appreciating the approach that you were describing, and commenting on the one-to-one nature, and asking whether you thought that those one-to-one interactions should be supplemented with a broader community level approach.
I think we mix it in as much as we can, where it's appropriate, because it takes a village. There's not a, and to be quite honest with you, anytime I do this work, or people who have similar backgrounds, we're also reliving our own trauma. You know what I'm saying? We're also kind of re-traumatizing ourselves in a way, like when we share what our experiences is. So the more we tell our stories, we actually psychologically relive them. And over the years, it gets kind of rough. So we need, long story short, we need as many allies and collaborations as we can in this battle. So if we're able to broaden it where it's appropriate, I definitely recommend doing so, because many hands make light work. I'm not as quick from the hip, as Carlton is with the metaphors and all that. But many hands make light work, and and there's a lot of work to be done in this field. So as much collaboration as possible. That's what I say.
Thank you. And don't sell yourself short. I've read your poetry. I know you can communicate. All right, so I'm gonna ask, we're nearing the end of our time. There is a question in the Q&A. I'm gonna ask the panelists to check it out. But someone is asking how they can continue to follow your great work. So if you click on the Q&A and then you click on the answered, I provided your websites, but if folks can provide social media information, I think maybe that's what's being requested here. Let's see. We have time for one more question. Panelists, do you see a question that you're dying to answer?
I do.
Okay. And before you get started, let me say for the last one about de-escalation, please tune into part 2 of this webinar. Go ahead, Carlton.
There's a question that asks, with respect to violence prevention programs, acknowledging that the return investment may not be seen for 5 to 15 years, how do you measure program or effectiveness along the way? I think one thing you do is look at your program participants. You can collect both qualitative and quantitative data based off of the individuals that are in your program. So you can get stories from the individuals like Noe. Of course, we can measure based off of his previous incarcerations prior to being involved with us and in his program. How many times has he been incarcerated? How long was his stint being out lasted prior to connecting to a community-based organization? Did we reduce that time frame? Noe is still out now. It's probably, he didn't share all of his story, but Noe is a repeat offender, right? And so giving him the safety net that he needs and a space that's comfortable for him to be able to share his story and to grow is important. Another thing about Noe I like to mention is that he just recently become a father, right? And so we're talking to him about fatherhood, and he's excited about being a father, and we share stories with him about fatherhood and the importance of being there. But then also looking at statistics that says 7 out of 10 children that have a parent incarcerated one day becomes incarcerated. So knowing that the choices that you make have a domino effect on everybody that's connected to you. And so there's ways of measuring success. Although, yes, you may not say you don't get your return on investment for 5 years, but I think you can measure your return on investment within 1 year. Look at how much it costs to incarcerate an individual on a daily basis. How much have you invested in that individual to stay out? And then compare the two. And then from there, you will see a return on the investment of investing in this young man's life compared to him being sitting in a facility and it's costing $300 a day and he's there for 9 months. So you do the math there. If he's there $300 a day, 30 days is $900. $9,000, 9 months. That's $81,000. It didn't cost $81,000 to help him transition back into society, help him get work-based learning, help change his mindset. It took time, it took hard work, but at the end of the day, we can measure that by how long he's been out, the successes he's made by obtaining a job and working and getting GED classes done, and then also by just his story in of itself, the qualitative story that he can provide. So I just wanted to add that to it. I don't know if anybody else want to add something else to that.
That was beautiful. We are actually at time. So I want to thank everybody for dialing in and staying with us the whole time. Please, we will keep you posted about the next installment in this conversation. We're also going to collect, we didn't get to all of the excellent questions. So we're going to collect those and work with the Forgotten Third and National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform to get you some real thoughtful answers to those. But David, Taylor, Keelan, Carlton, Noe, thank you so much for giving your time and your wisdom today. And thank you everyone for dialing in. Be safe.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.